Today's fallacy is called the slippery slope fallacy. The slippery slope fallacy is very popular in politics and religious discussions. The idea that if we let one thing happen, it will lead to these radical consequences that we don't want to deal with, right? So it used to be the idea that if we legalize same-sex marriage, it's going to lead to all sorts of perversions in the world. Like next will be polygamy, and then next will be marrying, your dog or something. If we allow this one thing, it's going to lead to these crazy things. Like in Texas, the Texas prisons, you have to wear prison whites. You can't wear a variety of clothes or free world clothes. But a few years ago, they started to let people wear free world shoes. Families could send in free world shoes. Right. What the idea used to be that if we let these inmates wear their own shoes, then the next thing that's going to happen is they're going to show up with gang colors and gang affiliations. Right. In other words, we allow this one thing and then it's going to lead to these really negative consequences. That's the slippery slope. So what you have to do is show that there's actual logical evidence that allowing one thing will lead to these other negative consequences, but that's not usually done. It's just assumed that radical things are going to take place. Everything's going to lead to chaos if we allow this one thing to occur, right? It's just a panic parade that rolls from one little step to like a total meltdown of the system with no real evidence to back it up. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy breaks it down like this. The fallacy of the slippery slope generally takes the form that from a given starting point, one can, by a series of incremental inferences, arrive at an undesirable conclusion, and because of this unwanted result, the initial starting point should be rejected, right? In other words, step 1 equals step 10, minus proof for steps 2 through 9. Step 1 equals step 10. What do they say? You give them an inch, they take a mile. That's basically what's going on with the slippery slope fallacy. We like these things because, again, this sort of worst case scenario thinking, doomsday thinking, doomsday dominoes, right? The domino effect. This helps us survive, right? If we're very cautious, conservative, we're looking at all the negative consequences that can occur. It enables us to survive better, right? That's one reason that we do this. Another is just because we're generally pessimistic. Seeing things as moving from point A to point D and just cutting right through point B and C, it's easier for us to see things in a straight line than to evaluate all the different points or bends in a particular road. Right? When we yell slippery slope, it's an attempt to shut the conversation down, but in real life, not everything moves from point A to point D in a straight and very predictable line. There's going to be all sorts of things that occur that we couldn't have anticipated, and that's just how real life is. But this idea of the slippery slope is just based on probability guesses, not solid evidence. And probability guesses can be a good thing, and in many times our decision making is only based on probabilities. Not solid evidence, but this can become a fallacy in our way of thinking if we assume the worst, right? Or we assume these radical consequences will for sure occur if we allow this small thing to occur first. And this is a really important factor in the way prisons are run, because the idea is if there, even in the inmate culture, if there's any weakness shown, then that's going to open the door for other possibilities that make it not safe for you as an individual. So you got to play the tough role, right? Or, playing the gay game with people, right? Somebody's going to take it out of hand, and then you're going to have to, stand up for yourself or put somebody in check. So maybe it's best to just not even play like that, from the jump. So this is an important thing in terms of security among inmates for yourself, but then also security at large, right? So if we allow them to wear free world shoes, then they're going to abuse that privilege by wearing gang colors and stuff like that. If we make this one tweak to the schedule, then it's going to show compromise in security, and it's going to cause all sorts of chaos down the road. In fact, I remember that thing happening when I worked in one of the prisons. The guys would come to me to intervene on their behalf with the staff for a variety of things. And I had to make decisions all the time as to whether or not my intervention was going to lead to something bad. So, for example, the idea that, okay, well, if I intervene to help change their schedule so that they can get to school on time, that seems legit. But then they started coming to me because they wanted me to get their schedule changed so they could make commissary, and get their schedule changed so they could go to rec on time, and get their schedule changed for all these other things. And so it was like one thing did lead to a lot of other things. So I learned over time I had to shut things down at a certain point. So it is the case that sometimes one compromise, one opening, one weakness in the structure can lead to chaos, but not all the time. When I was locked up many years ago, we didn't have phones in the living areas, right? They have phones in the living areas now. When I was locked up, if you wanted a phone call in prison, you had to fill out a form. You could get a phone call like every 90 days for 5 or 10 minutes, and you would be on the phone, and the law would be on the phone right there with you listening in. And then there'd be a long line of other people in line to get on the phone. Now the phone is right in the living area. You might have to make the phone call in front of everybody else, but it's still much easier access. And the idea was, if they allow something like that, then it's going to cause all sorts of problems and more crime and gang activity, right? So whether or not that is the case is something that has to be researched and studied, but just allowing people more access to the phone doesn't necessarily mean it's going to lead to bad. Same with the tablets. Right. The idea of allowing people to have the tablets, security had to think about what that might lead to. Allowing people access to the internet, security has to think about what that might lead to. So the slippery slope fallacy is big. It looms large in the minds of security in prison. So it is a legitimate way to think about or be concerned. But if we assume that the catastrophic end results will in fact occur with certainty, then we're wrong, because we don't actually have proof of that. It's just a concern we have. So when it comes to the slippery slope, you want to ask yourself if there's any solid data that the chain of events in question has happened or will happen. Right. So if we're talking about allowing people to get to wear free world shoes, is there any evidence from another state that did that and it led to all sorts of gang activity? Or did allowing the phones lead to, nefarious consequences? Did allowing people to have access to the tablets lead to bad consequences? Is there some evidence that the chain of events has happened or will happen? Right. Also, are the links between point A, B, C, and then this catastrophic result, are they actually likely to occur, or is it just simply a possibility? Remember, in the past, in the critical thinking series, we talked about the difference between probabilities and possibilities. Is the chain of events that you are concerned about, or the other person is concerned about, are they only likely or probable to occur, or merely possible to occur? If it's likely that this chain of events will occur, then that is a stronger piece of evidence against it than the mere possibility that it may in fact occur. Also, what policies or breaks or stop gaps could be put between point A, B, C, and D so that it doesn't lead to these catastrophic results that people think that might occur. So when it comes to the slippery slope, you want to validate the other person's concerns, right? They're cautious in the context of the prison. Security matters. Nobody denies that. I have to deal with that a lot when I'm talking about education opportunities that should be available to people in prison. But, security matters. I get that. When validating the other person's concern, ask them which steps are they actually concerned about. what worries them the most and try to offer to fact check that sort of thing. And then whatever area concerns them most, what potential policy tweak could occur to block that, to hinder that sort of thing from occurring. So it's not, so you're discussing the fact that this new policy could be enacted as long as there are some conditions. There are some things that are going to prevent it from getting out of control. So you do want to just affirm the fact that you do understand people's problem, but just calling out or using the slippery slope to end an argument is a fallacy. Small decisions can snowball into problems, if nobody's paying attention, but every small baby step towards something is not going to lead to catastrophe.